Hello, everyone. I'm live. I'm going to wait for YouTube to catch up. And we already have a super chat from Dinoside13 that says, hell yeah, I caught the live stream. First super chat here for our based Lady of Liberty. Thank you. Thank you. So while YouTube catches up and Facebook as well, we'll see who is in the chat. We have Matthew Malloy, Talisman, Cap and Mac, Andrew Kang, BS in California. Whoops, it just scrolled. Oh, and we have Liberty Dago now behind me. Leonidas Alberia, Wandering Stew, Tada, Tim Allen, Nomad is in, Robert Graham, Tony. Let's see who else. Quintus Speed, Michael J, Kirk Morrison, Patty O Furniture. Bruce the Boss is in the house. Let's see. Frank. I'm always so amused when it's people that just have like a single name. David Neal, Q. Whoop, and that's some more thunder. Fish and Golf and Guns. Let's see. Perry Stark, Russell. Steve Pat says, hope you and Liberty Baby are doing well. Thank you. It was funny because just the other day I was saying like, man, I haven't reached that point yet where I'm like starving all the time. And now today I'm like starving. I just had a big like second lunch maybe 3 hours ago and I'm starving already. Let's see. We see, Kimberly Rogers is in and says that it is her first live stream. So hello. Jonathan Stevie, Rose Blight, Blackbird, 08. Omega is in, and Omega is super awesome and apparently recently told the Quartering to watch my channel. And now I have a subscription, so that's pretty cool. He's the MVP of the week. David Deluxe, Carolina Infidel, Draxus Storm Shadow, Squid Monkey, Jay the Magic Robot, Chase Banzai, Dystopian Defense, Danny Smith, T.A. Florida, Tim Hazel, Jack Savage, Ricky Hendricks, Rudy72, Jeffrey Weir, A. Dubs, Chris Britt, Fine Ape, Ed Lick, Stuart Ulseth. Oh goodness, one of these ones with lots of numbers and letters. F308 GTB 1977. Jonathan Peterson, Drevik, John Toothman. Oh goodness, you guys. Masotis, I don't know, Rick Tennant, Michael Elmore, Donald Bumbarger, Sabby, I'm just going to say that and not go through all the letters, Andrew Kang, Glenn Vanisdale, Tennessee Beowulf, Conservatarian 17, Jesse Meek, and here we go, Jesse Sowell and Trashman in with the intro. Live from the barbecue state, it's the lady known for common sense, common decency, and comparing leftists to the common cold. And with those prevalent thoughts, here's Dolly. I like how that is our tradition now. That's become quite the tradition. And it's a good one. It's a good one. And Rose, thank you for the super chat. And He Who Is, thank you for the super sticker. I actually forgot to open up my other window so that I can see what exactly it is. Because with all of the updates to StreamYard, it's like a little like running hippo creature. That's really cute. With all of the updates to StreamYard, they changed the font for some reason recently. I still can't see the super stickers and have to go into a different window. Anyway, so very first thing. Oh, and my aunt is here. Hi, Auntie Di. Very first thing is if this suddenly cuts out, it is not YouTube censorship, not this time. We're in the middle of a thunderstorm, and it's been thundering out there, and there's like a warning. It's been thundering out there for at least an hour. So it's entirely possible that I will lose power or internet and power, both, whatever. That's a very distinct possibility that happens a lot more frequently here in the country than when I was back in Massachusetts. Steve Pat asks, have you and your husband discussed how you will introduce your children to firearms? Trying to find the best way to introduce my daughter to them when she's old enough. We've talked about it a little bit, but mostly it's such an individualized thing that's different per child. We obviously don't have any experience with it. We did introduce a niece to BB guns, and we gave her a BB gun with her parents' permission when she was 8 or 9, I think it was. And, my husband kind of just was like, hey, here's this thing, and it's really fun, but it's not a toy, and you have to, he gave her the 4 cardinal rules of firearm safety, even applied to a BB gun that was like, hey, never point this at anyone or you're going to hurt them, and, don't do this, don't do that. And emphasized the importance of safety with it, and was like, hey, if you can't be safe with it, then you're not going to be able to shoot it anymore. And she actually took to that really well and was very responsible with it, which we were surprised about, quite frankly, not gonna lie. We were pretty surprised about it. But also, we kept it at our house and not at her house, so she could only use it when my husband was with her and showing her how to use it. Every kid is so different that I don't think there's a really cut and dry answer to this. You probably want to start out with like a single shot 22 or something small like that. I don't know. But I think definitely you also want to tell them probably as young enough as possible that they can have a conversation and understand this to a degree. Hey, if you see a firearm somewhere, don't touch it. Don't point it at anyone. Go and get an adult right away so that we can all be safe. Just so that they have that basic respect. Otherwise, I'm not really sure. I'm not really entirely sure how we're going to handle that. It's really going to depend on their age and their maturity level. Well, her age and her maturity level at the time. We do have a friend that has a couple of children. And even though he thought that the older child was ready, he waited until the younger child was ready so he could introduce them both at the same time so they wouldn't get jealous or something, which I think is a kind of nice idea. Ooh, excuse me. Christoph says, still moving into the mountains. How long before you expect federal lockdowns to follow LA and Vegas? So I just saw this right before I came on, that there are new lockdowns in LA. Now, I remember in one of the, let's see. Okay, this is a news story. I know that a few weeks ago on one of the Liberty Minute episodes, I talked about how LA was reintroducing their mask guidelines. At the time, it wasn't a mandate. That has since changed. Basically, Gavin Newsom announced his grand reopening of California. I remember I likened it to the reopening of an Olive Garden or something. And it was 2 weeks later, almost on the dot, that LA was like, oh, well, actually, we're going to have the mask mandate, mask guidance again, even though at the time it went against the CDC guidance and the WHO guidance and all of that. Now I believe that it is a full mandate. And this article that I just clicked on is actually just a link to a Tim Pool video. So that's not going to help us. And that is from January. All right, we're going to have to go to Google instead of DuckDuckGo. I want to cover, I am going to cover today the BuzzFeed expose about the ways in which the FBI, the integral role that the FBI played in the plot to kidnap Gretchen Whitmer, governor of Michigan, for folks that don't know. But being that the weather looks a little bit shady, I want to cover some of these like faster stories first so I can make sure I can actually get some content out for you guys in the event that I do lose power. Let's see. Here we go. There's something from the New York Times. We have something from the Washington Post. And we'll start with the LA Times since they're local here. And we'll see what they have to say. All right. So this is from the LA Times. With mask mandate, LA County now leads national battle against the Delta variant. And by the way, all of the DC officials right now, including Joe Biden himself, are saying that this is a pandemic and plague among the unvaccinated, and that if you're vaccinated, Biden actually just did he just had a town hall a couple days ago, I believe. I've seen some clips from it where he flat out said if you have the vaccine, you cannot catch COVID, which isn't true. There are such a thing as breakthrough infections, and actually there was one of the trending topics on Twitter today while I was finishing up a video on Black Rifle Coffee Company. It's going to be a good one. You guys are going to like it. It's a doozy. It'll be up tomorrow. But as I was finishing that up, on the little trending news tab on the side of Twitter, there actually came up an article about how a bunch of people that are fully vaccinated are now catching COVID and why that's possible. And that was a trending topic. We also had an article that just came out of Israel saying that 60% of their new COVID infections in Israel right now are in people that are already vaccinated. We also had a headline out of Maine recently that Maine was leading the country in vaccinations. And then it had a chart of new cases of COVID, and it showed this huge spike at the same time. So absolutely, you can be vaccinated and still catch COVID. The whole idea of the vaccines was not to stop people from catching it. It's to decrease the severity of the symptoms if you do still catch COVID. That's what the vaccines are for. But there's a bunch of officials saying that no, that's not the case, and that's not how it works, even though they originally said that that was the case and how it works. So now we have this Delta variant that's going around. There's also a Lambda variant, though I've heard it mentioned, haven't seen many headlines about it since the one or two times I saw it mentioned a few weeks ago. The Delta is the big thing. So the LA Times says that LA County now has a brand new mask mandate and are leading the national battle against the Delta variant. And to answer Christoph's question about how long do you expect federal lockdowns to follow? Well, they might try. They're not going to be successful, as Henry McMaster here in South Carolina said months ago that there would never be another lockdown here in South Carolina. And I just saw another headline before I came on that Governor DeSantis down in Florida has already said recently that they are not going to lock down again. Even if there's a federal lockdown, even with this stuff going on in LA, he said that it is completely out of the question and off the table. So, from the LA Times, imposing a sweeping indoor mask mandate, LA County has again pushed itself onto the front lines of the national battle to contain the hyper-contagious Delta variant of the coronavirus. They're saying that it is more easily spread than the previous strain, while federal and state authorities continue to urge the unvaccinated to take safety precautions and get their shots. LA County has gone a step further, turning to mandatory masking in indoor public settings, even for those who are vaccinated, in hopes of turning the tide. The effect of the new health order, which goes into effect Saturday night, won't become clear for a few weeks. Should the strategy prove successful, LA County could provide a blueprint for blunting transmission without resorting to the business closures and lockdowns that sparked so much frustration and fear over the last 16 months. So this was posted when? July 17th. So that the mask mandate in LA County then is going into effect tomorrow. I do know that there are countries in Europe that are locking down again already a couple weeks ago. To combat the Delta variant, there were flights that were canceled and flat out banned from certain countries, areas of certain countries. Travel is being restricted again. There is talk of even broader scale. I don't want to say, well, there's a whole spectrum from banning travel to and from certain places to talking about full out on lockdowns. I also saw recently, and then the page refreshed before I got to click on it, someone had posted it on Facebook, a couple headlines of places that are trying to make it a felony or have jail time and other charges for not being able to present a vaccine passport, essentially. I don't believe that's anywhere here in the US. I believe it is in other countries, but it is something that is happening. France, I believe, was one of them. And they want to impose, I believe it said, 6 months of jail time. Actually, I remember what the original source was, so I can go find it. It was a news organization, actually, that I follow on Twitter. Disclose.tv. It was a screenshot. Let's see. Germany is setting up a national cell phone broadcast warning system, apparently, according to disclose.tv. But that's supposedly in reaction to some flooding. Let's see. In France, hospital staff have started an indefinite strike to protest against the compulsory vaccination of caregivers in France. CDC has added 6,000 new death reports in VAERS following the COVID-19 vaccinations in the U.S. This is more than double last week's total figure. Wow. That's pretty hardcore. And now, a couple hours later, a couple days later, they have been taken back out. Interesting. Let's see. You know what? We'll just show you this guy's. We'll show you guys this whole feed here, actually. Okay, so in Europe, they've just cleared Moderna's COVID vaccine in children and adolescents aged 12 and over. Here we go. New Pfizer shot, the vaccine given to nearly all Israelis, is now just 39% effective against infection, while being only 41% effective in preventing symptomatic cases, according to new stats out of the health ministry. Also, Pfizer just got in trouble because it turns out that Chantix causes cancer. That's something. Oh boy. Empty shelves in supermarkets in Britain, again, saying don't panic buy is what the officials are saying in Britain. This would be a great time to remind you all to check out My Patriot Supply. for their emergency food kits, linked down in the description, as well as the Alexa Pure. It's basically a Berkey. It's a gravity and charcoal filter to filter out water. I have one that I use every single day. 15 to 20% of Britain's workforce in the critical food supply chain are currently self-isolating. Wow. In Chicago, they're now saying that all students and staff are going to have to wear masks indoors, regardless of vaccine status, when they return to classes in August. Protests in Italy as they make a green pass, a COVID green pass, mandatory for most public places. So Italy is requiring basically a vaccine passport for public places, and people are protesting. There's lots going on in the world. Let's see. What news websites are offline in Germany? There was a big attack on the internet in Europe recently. But where was... Well, I had seen somewhere in here by this Twitter account, some of the other stuff and the lockdowns that were going on in Europe, but they post a lot. So, Nancy Pelosi has COVID. I'm going to try not to laugh at that. That would be rude and mean. But anyways, it does seem, if Europe is starting to do it and they're having protests and they're doing these vaccine passports, it does seem like that is a possibility here, especially with Joe Biden in charge. All right, F308 says, sorry for the long username. It's a Ferrari 308 GTB, and no, I don't own one, sadly, and they made them in 1977, among other years, which is the year I was born. Thanks for the shout out. Well, thank you for the donation and the explanation. And that's weird that it's not coming up down at the bottom, but Jesse Meek, thank you, says, just a little love for the Liberty fam, just in case the power goes. Thank you. And also, Jesse gave me a heads up this morning that there are rumors that there's going to be another hike in price for gas and fuel, I guess, this weekend. So if you have to fill up, do it now. Do it soon, because prices are supposedly going to go up. All right. Let's see. So one of the things that I wanted to talk about today, just a couple of little stories that I thought were interesting, and then we'll go into the big BuzzFeed expose. So this is a story. This is an older story, but the details of it were actually just released a few days ago. We've talked a little bit about swatting, the practice of swatting on the stream, and there was also that time when I was back in my office in Massachusetts where my husband came in and didn't tell me he was coming in, and y'all thought I was getting swatted. Because there were also sirens and flashing lights and things because I was like across the street from the police and fire station. So we've chatted about it. So for those that don't know, the practice of swatting is basically when someone gets mad on the internet or on a video game or with their neighbor or whoever and calls the police on the person and makes a false report of like an active shooter or a bomb threat or something like that, so that the SWAT team gets called and shows up. It's had some pretty nasty and disastrous results for a lot of people that it's been done to. This guy died, apparently. A 60-year-old man died of a heart attack after being swatted over his Twitter handle. Details of the incident, which took place in 2020, were made public in a new report. So the story isn't that old. It's from last year. But again, new report with new details. In April of 2020, a 60-year-old man was the victim of a swatting attack where perpetrators phoned U.S. police forces with bogus information, hoping to incite an armed response at their victim's location. After surrendering to the police surrounding his home, Mark Herring suffered a heart attack and died shortly thereafter. Now, a new report by WKRN News 2 has shed light on the circumstances of this incident and the petty reasons behind it. Mr. Herring had been targeted by minors because of his Twitter handle of @Tennessee, which was considered a valuable handle for some reason. He was apparently one of many being targeted in this fashion. It's a really weird reason to target someone because of a Twitter handle that says @Tennessee. I would expect if it was something trolly or overtly conservative or like edgelordy, I would expect someone like that to get targeted. Unfortunately, I would not expect someone to get targeted just because their handle was Tennessee, but okay. Herring's family explained the incident to News 2. Mr. Herring's son said it began when the neighbors called and said there's police everywhere and they think a man has killed a woman and he's on your property. You got to take cover. He went out of the house with a gun because he heard someone was on his property, says his daughter. He sees all these cops around him and they ask if he is Mark Herring. Put your hands up, so he tosses the gun away from him to show he's not a threat and put his hands up. He then suffered a heart attack and died in the hospital shortly thereafter. His wife says he was scared to death. In a way, he's lucky that that's what happened and not that he got shot, because unfortunately, we've seen a lot of videos of and heard a lot of stories of cops getting called to residences and, people not realizing it's the police and coming out with a gun, or just coming out in general and asking questions like, hey, what's going on? And then they get thrown to the ground and shot. There was a video that was out, I don't remember if it was last year or the year before, of a young man in a hotel. The police were called because this couple was in a hotel and they were watching a movie loudly or something like that. And someone in one of the other rooms thought that it was a domestic and called the police saying that there was a domestic and this guy was like killing his girlfriend or his wife or something. Cops showed up. The couple didn't even have time to explain themselves. They're yelling at the guy to get down on the ground. He got down and then they yelled for him to do something else. And they yelled all these instructions at him. He started to get confused, so they shot him, and he died and bled out right there in front of the hotel door. Apartment complex. Thank you. It was an apartment complex. Anglo-Saxon Knight has corrected me. So it's something that definitely happens. So, I guess it's great that he didn't get shot, but it sucks that he had this heart attack because he was so scared and stressed out. The article continues. Months later, the family learned about Shane Sanderman, the minor who had been targeting Mr. Herring and was responsible for the attack. He was from Tennessee, says Karina Fitch, that's Herring's daughter. He's the one that collected all our information, my address, my sister's, my mom's, my mother's sister, and put it on a channel on Discord, which we know is for gaming, and some of the YouTube streamers use it as well. So not only did this guy call the cops on someone over a Twitter handle, he doxed him and doxed the guy's entire family too, which is super smooth and mature, but not all that surprising, unfortunately, in this day and age. This was apparently an intimidation tactic to pressure Mr. Herring into giving up the Tennessee username. Kids these days. Then a kid in the UK made the call to my dad's local police department. So this was coordinated between several people, apparently. Really, is your Twitter handle that important where you have to get a guy killed over it? The minor in the UK is still not of age and thus cannot be identified or extradited. A federal grand jury indictment against Sonderman, who is currently in prison, cites 6 victims. Wow. So he was like a serial swatter, it sounds like. Mr. Herring was the only one to die. Sonderman faces a maximum of 5 years in prison and a $250,000 fine, which Mr. Herring's family considers inadequate. You've not just changed that one person's life, you've done a ripple effect. They need to pay for that. Mr. Herring was targeted for the value of a Twitter handle. $3,000 or $4,000, Karina Fitch says, like pennies compared to a life. Kids these days, man, I don't know. I'm sort of surprised by it, but not surprised by it at the same time. Because people on Twitter are crazy. Absolutely crazy. We also have another story today. This one involves Joe Biden and inflation and unemployment and all of these fun things that he's been lording over during his presidency. Another jobs report came out recently, and there was another increase in unemployment claims and another increase in job openings. Not, again, in the red states that have gotten rid of the extra federal pandemic unemployment aid, but still across the country as a whole. So Joe Biden ain't doing too great in that department, despite the claims that he was saving Americans 16 cents over 4th of July weekend by lowering prices, and despite the claims that his economy is flourishing, and despite claims from news outlets like CNN that inflation is actually helpful because it causes wages to rise. They do, but with inflation, they cancel each other out and you're pretty much back where you started. But this is an exclusive from the Daily Mail that I was just amused by. And Joe Biden did another inserting foot into mouth. Exclusive from the Daily Mail. Do you want to pay $50 for a hamburger, Joe? Furious restaurant owners vent at Biden for telling them to raise wages, which they say will lead to more inflation and drive them all out of business. Here are the highlights. On a Wednesday night, Biden told restaurant worker John Lanny to increase his staff's wages to survive. Restaurant owners on Thursday lashed out at the suggestion, which they say will drive inflation. In New York City, for example, the minimum wage is already $15. If it goes higher, owners will have to increase prices. And as a matter of fact, I just saw going all over Facebook today, a few different signs from different restaurants of sections that are completely closed because they don't have enough staff, of restaurants saying that they only have one bartender on the staff, and that's it. And so there's longer waits for drinks and stuff, and asking people to be patient. Signs saying that because of inflation, they have a temporary increase of 15% on all of their items and prices. Spoiler alert, it's not going to be temporary. Inflation isn't going to be temporary. The only way that we could get back to some semblance of balance is if the Fed raises interest rates. They've said that they're going to do that, but they've said that they're going to do that sometime in 2022. Then they backtracked, then they went back to it. They're just flip-flopping all over the place. But in every point that the Fed raises interest rates back up corresponds to typically like a 10% dip in the stock market and in the economy in general. So that's probably why they're hesitant to do that, because, they'll just be blamed for stock crashes and economy crashes, but that's far better than the crash that's actually going to happen when all of this stuff reaches the tipping point. Many of the staples, everyday staples that Americans use and that businesses use are either right now under crazy hyperinflation. At one point, I don't know why my dog is freaking out behind me. At one point, we've talked about how the prices of corn are up 120%. There's corn shortages, there's wheat shortages, grain shortages in general. Now there are rubber shortages, there's computer chip shortages, there's lumber shortages, there's work shortages, labor shortages, food shortages, chicken shortages. They're having shortages at Wendy's and at Taco Bell. The list goes on and on and on. And as I mentioned in one of my videos, historically speaking, once inflation of food items gets to a certain point, historically, that is when you see uprisings and revolutions and people getting violent. We already had some experience with that, with, the BLM protests and riots and all of that over the summer. This would be for something else. This would be over rising prices and the basic cost of living. And now Joe Biden is turning around and saying, well, this has nothing to do with governmental policies. This has nothing to do with quantitative easing. This has nothing to do with the money that they're just handing out to people. Has nothing to do with that. He's saying, oh, well, it's just that your restaurants suck to work at, and so you need to raise wages. While that might be true in some circumstances, generally speaking, if you are paying people $15 an hour to stay home and not work, those people are not going to go out and get a job for $15 an hour because they can stay home and not work and get the same amount of money. As far as I know, the extra pandemic assistance is continuing into September at this point. They're probably going to push it even further if now there are states and counties talking about locking down again. I don't really see an end to this, but new jobless claims jumped to 419,000 this week, the highest in 2 months. There are still more than 12 million people claiming unemployment in America. In 2019, the number was 5.8 million. So it is still more than double. John Stratidis, the manager of the famous Cozy Soup and Burger Diner in Manhattan's Greenwich Village, said it could put people out of business. Then we have Robert Mann, owner of Toro Loco, Amor Loco, and Broadstone, said Biden's expanded unemployment benefits must end in order to solve the problem. And these are apparently people in New York, which says a lot. Republicans are pushing for Biden to replenish the Restaurant Revitalization Fund to help owners. But, giving out more free money to businesses that are failing because you're giving out free money is not going to solve the problem that is being caused by giving out free money. It's just prolonging the inevitable and making the situation even worse. But unfortunately, if you talk to anyone on the left about this, then they say just, oh, well, you have to raise wages and Biden is just making sure that everyone has like a universal basic income. They're looking at it as basically like a substitute for a UBI and saying, well, this is what we need to do to take care of people, not understanding the long-term economic consequences at all. They called his remarks patronizing, out of touch, and demonstrative that he's never run a business. And I mean, he hasn't. That's accurate. 26 states have ended the expanded benefits and are already seeing more people returning to work. Biden says he'll scrap them entirely in September. He insists that people aren't working in restaurants because they're now considering their other opportunities. Which is possible, but those are jobs that still need to be done. And, a job is a job is a job. I see, I follow these things, and we talked about in Indiana, this was a story that I covered in one of the Liberty Minute episodes. When we had all of these states that were talking about ending the benefits and starting that process, I believe it was Indiana announced that they were also going to end the benefits. And some of the citizens turned around and sued and said there was actually a woman that was quoted as saying that she doesn't want to go back to work, but she also doesn't want to have to change her family's brand of toilet paper or shampoo. That tells you a lot about where people's priorities lie. If they're saying, well, I can get money by staying home, so I'm not going to go to work, and you need to keep this program in place so that I don't have to give up my Charmin or my whatever fancy shampoo. I mean, that tells you a lot about people's mindsets. So restaurant owners are now lashing out at Biden for telling them they have to raise wages in order to attract staff, a move they say will drive inflation, put them out of business, and shows how little he understands about the country's labor crisis. Well, I mean, keep in mind, the guy can't even add right, so he's probably not going to understand much of anything at all. On Facebook recently, some status or ad that he put out about needing 2 years of pre-K and 2 years of free college was important because 12 years of government public education was no longer enough, not recognizing that K through 12 is 13 years. So the man can't even add, so he's not going to understand economic concepts. Just saying. The states with the highest unemployment rates of over 7%, which is 2% more than the current national average, are California, Connecticut, D.C., well, not a state, but okay, Hawaii, Illinois, Nevada, New Jersey, New Mexico, and New York. Well, they all have something in common, don't they? They are all Democratic states. That is not very surprising at all. Despite the huge number of people who are out of work, restaurant owners and other bosses are struggling to hire thanks to inflated unemployment benefits, which are $300 more a week than they were before the pandemic. Now, people can earn just as much, if not more, by doing nothing than they would have done in many jobs before COVID. At a town hall in Cincinnati on Wednesday night, Biden was asked by a restaurant owner what his administration was going to do to end the staff shortages. And I mean, this is also kind of a loaded question because, as we've talked about before, government does not provide jobs. The government doesn't create jobs, doesn't add jobs to the economy. This situation is a little bit different because the benefits that they're putting out are directly influencing the amount of people looking for work. But typically, government and jobs, they don't have a relationship like that. Biden replied by telling the restaurant owner that he should increase wages and that the reason restaurants were struggling to hire people was that workers were considering, quote, different opportunities. And then, of course, they say that Biden has never run a business and is detached from reality. They say that they already run on razor-thin margins, are in the red after 18 months of punitive lockdowns in varying forms. That's something that I also talked about in a video. I believe it was in the Panera Cares video, that on average, restaurants run on a profit margin of only 1 to 6%, but the average is around 2%. That's really not a lot of wiggle room. So to raise wages by however much, depending on what state people are in, you have two choices. You can raise your prices and potentially lose customers and go under, or just flat out go under. Those are really your only two options. I suppose you can fire a bunch of staff to raise wages, but if you're already short-staffed, that is definitely not going to solve the problem. They say that the only way to bring restaurant staff back is to get rid of the high unemployment payments, keeping people at home. If they're forced to increase wages to attract staff, they say they have no choice but to increase the prices on their menus too. And that is how minimum wages work as well, because every time minimum wage gets raised, everyone who is in a minimum wage position, well, okay, they get more money. And then the people above them are like, well, how come they're getting a raise and I don't? So they get more money. And it just keeps going up the ladder, which, okay, you might say, well, then that's great because everyone gets a pay raise, but that's not how that works. So say that your job is selling office supplies, right? Well, now that you have to pay all of your people on the floor that are selling their office supplies more, this higher wage of, we'll say, $15 an hour. Well, you also, the truck drivers and the people that load the trucks and the people that unload the trucks and the people that load the stupid markers into the boxes in the first place, all of those people within the supply chain are also getting paid more. And what do companies generally have to do in order to pay people higher wages? Well, they have to raise prices because they have to have higher amounts of profits so they can then take that money and put it back into their employees. So your supply chain all the way down the line is now costing more money. And so what do you have to do? You have to raise prices too. So then prices get raised across the board, thereby making the raise in minimum wage a null and moot point, because the whole system is just kicked up a couple notches instead of having the lower wage people being the only ones that are getting raised up. It's basic economics. It might not sound basic, but it's basic economics. Telling restaurant workers and owners that they need to raise their wages so that they can attract more workers is the same thing, except it's going to just start in the food sector and then branch out into other areas. And New York, I believe, out of all states, had the highest number of restaurant closures across the country because of COVID. It was, restaurants in New York City mostly. They had at one point, it was only a couple months in, and already something like 10,000 restaurants had closed down. 6 months in, I think it was, there was an estimate that the country as a whole had already lost over 100,000 restaurants and small businesses because of COVID. This is just going to knock even more off the map. Excuse me. Republican lawmakers have slammed Biden's remarks as patronizing, of course, and out of touch, which they are. And even the restaurant owners themselves say, yep, okay, we raise prices, or if we raise wages, we have to raise prices, and it'll put customers off and eventually put them out of business. That is even happening here before they stopped the federal pandemic unemployment payments. Several restaurants, ones that we even like and went to a lot, ended up closing their doors. A local location of our favorite restaurant here actually just closed down 2 weeks ago. Gone completely. But, Biden is just saying for people to pay more, and that's it. Biden actually had a lot of crappy, really bad takes at his town hall. He also sort of slipped up, and when he was talking about gun violence and his plan to get rid of, quote, gun violence, he said, well, violence isn't up, it's the guns. It's the guns that are the problem. And then he talked about wanting to ban assault weapons and standard capacity magazines. But then he also mentioned 9mm. There was also the hot take where he said that if you get the vaccine, you can't catch COVID. He had a lot of no-nos during that town hall. But according to this article, more than 280,000 restaurants have already applied to the Restaurant Revitalization Fund. That is what some lawmakers are saying Biden should pump more money into. And the total sum that they applied to was $72 billion was the total amount that was requested from all of these restaurants that applied. Congress only allotted $28 billion to the program and dished it out between 100,000 applicants. So that really adds to it when, I'm not saying that the government should be in the business of handing out money to people, obviously. But if the original way that you tell people to solve the problem is, well, okay, we'll apply to this program that I've started up specifically for restaurants to keep you on your feet, and then you give out money to less than half of the people that apply, that is a slap in the face when you turn around then and tell these people that they need to raise wages so they can recoup their losses and get staff back. Slap in the face. But, we all know when it came out that Biden was going to be the one who was sworn in as president this year, I think we all knew that it was not going to be a good time for economic policy. And certainly that has proven to be the case. So I'm going to jump into the super chats because I know a few have come in, and then we're gonna go through this whole crazy FBI story. And I'm going to try and summarize it, I guess, as best as I can. It's going to be tough because, that the BuzzFeed expose is quite lengthy. Let's see. Trashman says, I got my daughter a Red Ryder at 7, and we built her AR at 12, and then she discovered boys. Oh, with a sad face. Oh. Yeah, unfortunately, then she discovered boys, but she'll be back to it at some point, I'm sure. Let's see. Rose Blight says, according to the BBC, 40% of those hospitalized for the Rona have had both shots. Well, there we go. So, and just last week, I think it was Biden. I believe it was last Friday. Or maybe it was the Friday before when we were discussing the Facebook story of how the White House is going to be working with Facebook to flag misinformation. And there was a little tidbit where a reporter says, well, Joe Biden, what do you have to say to Facebook? And he said, you're killing people. It's only the unvaccinated that are getting sick. Well, we have those numbers out of Israel of 60%. And thanks to Rose now, the BBC is saying 40% over in the UK. So, yeah, it might not be as bad. I don't know. But to say that it is only people that don't have the vaccine that are dying and causing these lockdowns to pop up and causing all of this to continue is not factual. I was going to say something else, but Jesse Meek says Delta variant, Lambda variant. Does anyone else think they're trying to relive their fraternity days? That is a possibility. Jesse Sowell, thank you for the super sticker. And Gardner, thank you. Gardner says, thank God for you and your insights, LD. I hope folks are prepared. Given the increase in the money supply and downward pressure on employment, prices aren't going to be good to good people. Rock on. That is true. We actually today, I was hoping to post my new video earlier, but instead we went to Sam's Club and stocked up on some more things. We got some Mylar bags. We got the oxygen absorbers. I have a hair straightener that I never use to seal them shut. And we do have some things, like we have some kits from My Patriot Supply. We've gotten some other bits and pieces from Emergency Essentials and Augustin Farms and some different companies like that to, fill in the gaps. And because there's a lot of the stuff with My Patriot Supply, my husband can't eat with his 5 million food allergies. And then, so we also wanted to supplement that with some rice and some beans and things like that, that we can, dry goods that we can store ourselves, that we will also use eventually if we don't end up needing them because of food shortages or inflation or whatever. So I thought today we were going out and just getting a couple sacks of rice. We bought 125 pounds of rice. I was just standing there staring and watching as my husband picked up another bag and put it in the cart. And he's like, well, if we're going to do it, we might as well go big. I mean, it was cheap. It was not even $9 for 25 pounds or something like that. But, so we have 125 pounds of rice that I now need to divide into 5-gallon Mylar bags. It's going to be an adventure. But yes, hopefully people are prepared. We have, 2 chest freezers now full of food. One of them actually is getting low because that's how we rotate, is we go back and forth. We've got the stuff from My Patriot Supply. I've got the water. I've got 2 water filtration systems actually, also from Alexa Pure through My Patriot Supply. I've got a couple backup filters for that, and we've got all kinds of goodies just in case. And, if there's never an apocalyptic scenario, well, it'll at the end of the day save us a bunch of money, because most of it is stuff that we use in general anyways. And so money is worth more now than it will be in 6 months, a year, 2 years, 5 years, or whatever. So that sack of rice that we bought today is cheaper than it will be 5 and 10 years down the line. So anyways, Corey Gardner says it takes 650 pounds of dry food per person per year. Well, hopefully we don't need a year's worth of stuff, but we are slowly stocking up here. I actually calculated it out once of servings per person between the 2 of us, and then children and stuff like that. Let's see. I saw someone else said something. David Neal says you can now make a real big batch of rice pudding. And Patio Furniture says Sam's Club, where you walk in for TP and end up with a new set of snow tires and a 5-gallon jug of Cheeto Puffs. I saw those Cheeto Puffs today. They were calling my name, but I said, no Cheeto, not today. Okay. All right. So we are going to go into this FBI BuzzFeed expose thing. It's pretty extensive. So we're not going to go through the whole BuzzFeed article, because when I say it's an expose, I mean, this thing goes and goes and goes and goes line goes. It's a long one. But there are some pretty pertinent details that we can gather even just with a quick skim, and then we'll jump to a couple of the news articles that are reporting on this article just for the sake of time because it's already 8 o'clock. So basically, the article starts out and it talks about, in the start of the article, 2 or 3 separate people who were in the plot and how they were scoping out roadways, they were scoping out bridges, they were scoping out boat launches, they were scoping out where they could put plastic explosives to blow up a bridge in order to escape, all while they were allegedly plotting to kidnap Gretchen Whitmer in response to her very tight lockdowns that she had in Michigan. If you remember back into 2020, she basically was at one point introducing a new rule every week or so. And the craziest of them were like you were allowed to be outside in a motorboat, but canoes were banned. She forbade stores from selling paint and seeds. The home improvement and gardening section of big box stores were completely blocked off, as were these sections of like American flags and things like that. For some reason, people who were living in Michigan and were residents of Michigan were not really technically even supposed to leave their city or town. But people who were from out of state were allowed in, but people who were in state were not allowed to travel to vacation homes or cabins or campsites if they had anything like that. They were told strictly to stay home all the time. And it escalated to the point that there were then 2 big protests where protesters came in and they clogged up all the streets around the Capitol, and one of them actually breached the Capitol of Lansing, of Michigan, Lansing, Michigan. And I mean, they didn't really do anything. They kind of just like stood around and yelled that it was their house. But, you know, the optics, according to the left, were not great. And then someone was interviewed because they had a sign about how politicians were going and getting their hair cut while everyone else was locked down. And that's how we got the narrative of all these people were only protesting because they wanted to have their hair cut. Obviously, it was twisted. So then there was this supposed plot in response to all of that to kidnap Gretchen Whitmer. And so this article, like I said, talks about all of the original surveillance that was done in plotting this kidnapping with the ultimate goal of either putting her in a boat and dropping her off in a lake, just like stranded in a boat in a lake, or taking her to Wisconsin where she could be tried for tyranny. I mean, realistically, even if she was brought to Wisconsin, I mean, she's not going to go up in front of a court for tyranny. I think we all know that that wasn't going to happen. But it turns out that all of these people that they mentioned in the beginning that are doing all of this surveillance were FBI agents and FBI informants. And like this one guy that was like, oh, is everybody down with what's going on? And, you know, kept turning the conversation back to how they were going to do this, suggesting that they blow up the bridge to make it easier to get away from police and stuff like that. FBI informant. In fact, this one guy was wearing a wire for 6 months as part of the FBI in order to get information on this. And it turns out that there might not even have been much of a case without these FBI agents, because The government has documented at least 12 confidential informants who assisted the sprawling investigation. The trove of evidence they helped gather provides an unprecedented view into American extremism, blah, 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 blah. Except an examination of the case by BuzzFeed News also reveals that some of those informants acting under the direction of the FBI played a far larger role than has previously been reported. Working in secret, they did more than just passively observe and report on the actions of the suspects. Instead, they had a hand in nearly every aspect of the alleged plot, starting with its inception. The extent of their involvement raises questions as to whether there would have even been a conspiracy without them. And that right there is the golden nugget of this story. If it weren't for these FBI agents and these FBI informants, we later find out in the rest of the article, there probably wouldn't have been a conspiracy against Whitmer, because the informants and FBI agents together, they found the people that they thought would be good candidates for this. They introduced the idea to these candidates. They arranged the meeting for all of these people to get together and start discussing this. And at one point was even, I don't want to say bribing people, but they were like, basically like, hey, if you come to this meeting and we discuss this kidnapping plot, I'll pay for you to get there and I'll pay for your food and hotel room. Like, they were offering gifts in exchange for people to come and work out the details on how to kidnap Gretchen Whitmer. But the original idea itself was created by and planted by FBI agents and FBI informants. And I know there's going to be some people that are watching this and are not surprised at all and are saying, I told you so. And I know there was a lot of people way from the beginning that said that it reached like a false flag. And I mean, clearly it is. This is clearly conspiracy, entrapment, incitement to violence. I mean, there's a whole different range of charges that all of this could fall under, but there is a difference between suspecting something to be true and actually having a news story coming out about it. And it is bizarre to me that it is BuzzFeed that is coming up with these exposés recently. It's really wacky, actually, that BuzzFeed has been doing some real journalism lately. It's turning the world on its head a little bit. A longtime government informant from Wisconsin, for example, helped organize a series of meetings around the country where many of the alleged plotters first met one another, and the earliest notions of a plan took root. Some of those people say the Wisconsin informant even paid for some hotel rooms and food as an incentive to get people to come. So an FBI informant literally picked people out and arranged meetings and organized these meetings and paid for these meetings and said, hey, we should do this. This is a great idea, and convinced people to join into this plot. He introduced the idea of it in the first place. And yet all of these other people are the ones that get arrested. I mean, the FBI has been doing things like this for a long time. Like, this is nothing new. And you know, they were under a lot of fire during the Trump administration. There were questions as to how they handled things. There were questions about political bias and all of that going around. You know, people were looking at them more closely. And well, what do you do when you want to convince people that they need the FBI or maybe the FBI needs a bigger budget? Well, you create a problem for the FBI to solve. The ATF did this at one point as well, and well, that's how we got Waco. They were like, oh no, we have all this bad press from Ruby Ridge. We should do something about Waco. And then they burned a bunch of people and children to death and took pictures next to the bodies. It is not unheard of for alphabet agencies to, plot out these sorts of things and, create problems to make their agency look better. And this appears to be one of those incidents. The Iraq vet, who was also an informant, for his part became so deeply enmeshed in a Michigan militant group that he rose to become its second in command, encouraging members to collaborate with other potential suspects and paying for their transportation to meetings. How can you say that this group of people came up with this plot and arrest them on this plot when the second in command of the plot that was helping to create the plot works for the FBI? He prodded the alleged mastermind of the kidnapping plot to advance his plan, then baited the trap that led to the arrest. This account is based on an analysis of court filings, transcripts, exhibits, audio recordings, and other documents, as well as interviews with more than 24 people with direct knowledge of the case, including several who were present at meetings and training sessions where prosecutors say the plot was hatched. All but one of the 14 original defendants have pleaded not guilty, and they vigorously deny that they were involved in a conspiracy to kidnap anyone. And then it's like, oh, then they post some of the exhibits. We have a Boog meme. We have some selfies with looks like an operator helmet. We have a little chat message here. Things like that. Now, they say that the prosecution gathered thousands of social media posts, some 400,000 text messages, and more than 1,300 hours of recordings, including audio or video from all three vehicles it alleges traveled to Birch Lake on the night of September 12th. That was the day that they were doing some surveillance. It maintains that this evidence shows many of those who were charged not only expressed anti-government sentiments, but also took concrete steps towards the goal of kidnapping or killing law enforcement officers and elected officials. But the thing is, if you continue going through this story, pretty much all of these guys, except for the one that, is pleading guilty, said, they were just talking about it and, that no one was talking about it seriously. It wasn't a real plan. They weren't going to do anything about it. They were just blowing off steam until these FBI guys came and were poking and prodding them and saying hey, this is a really good idea, and really gassing them up to actually go do this and feeding into it. So again, conspiracy, entrapment, at the very least, incitement to violence. If anyone else who's not an FBI agent or FBI informant went out and did that same thing, they would be hit on charges of incitement to violence. Cut and dry. We've been seeing stuff like that a lot over the last couple of years. Even just January 6th with Donald Trump saying, well, we're gonna go to the Capitol and listen to some people talk. They're saying that that's incitement to violence. They're saying that his entire presidency was incitement to violence. Now, there's no official indictment of that, so to speak, but the Democrats in the House and Democrats in the Senate are calling it that. The liberals and blue checks on social media and in the public at large are calling that. So in the court of public opinion, Donald Trump incited violence by existing up until January 6th. If that is what we are using as the qualification for incitement to violence, picking people out of a suspect list and being like, hey, you should go kidnap this governor that you don't like, and fueling into it and providing these guys with food and lodging and at some point training, because one of these agents even was training these people in like military tactics and how to actually get through with the kidnapping plot and how to do it. If you're providing food and lodging and providing the ideas and providing the training and really propping these people up and giving them like pep talks to go do the thing, that is certainly incitement to violence, with or without the Donald Trump existing being the bare minimum qualification. Absolutely insane. Now, I think the important part here too, and there is way, way, way more information in this article. If you guys want to do a deep dive, I will put it in the chat. I might even do a video about it at some point. We'll see, because it's gonna take a long time if I do. But here it is. It says that they claim that their talk never rose beyond the level of fantasy, and they never intended to harm anyone. But they participated in meetings and training events and communicated with people. But that was all orchestrated by these FBI agents and informants. Now, this article says that they came to this conclusion not because that's what the defendants were saying, but because of the social media posts and the text messages and the hours of recordings of audio and video from the vehicles and the events itself, from the meetings, as well as the pieces of evidence, the interviews, all of that. They got all of that together, and BuzzFeed of all outlets said, well, gee, it looks like this wouldn't have even happened if it wasn't created by the FBI. But then we go over to other outlets, and well, the story at the Hill is, oh, well, it's just what the defendants are claiming. They're claiming that the FBI set them up. Not that there's all this evidence that that's what actually happened, but, oh, well, that's what these guys are saying. It's such dishonest reporting. From the Hill, the men who are accused of attempting to kidnap Governor Gretchen Whitmer are saying the FBI set them up, according to court filings, evidence, and dozens of interviews seen by BuzzFeed News. So yes, there are court filings and evidence and interviews, but they're saying, the Hill's leading sentence here is that, well, it's what the defendants are saying, and that's their defense. There were at least 12 FBI informants involved in the investigation into the group for months while they were allegedly planning to kidnap the governor. The FBI's involvement was much bigger than previously known, as the agency was involved when the plot began and had informants allegedly encouraging the group to further its plans, BuzzFeed News reported. But again, if they're providing food and lodging and training and creating the original idea of the plot itself, then it's a lot more than like, oh, they encouraged the group. So far, one defendant has accused the agency of entrapment, claiming the informants encouraged the group and even led military-style trainings for the plot. Other defendants are expected to make similar claims at their trials in the next few months. This would not be the first time the FBI has been accused of entrapment, according to The Hill, as one group that was allegedly planning to murder police officers was acquitted after claiming the FBI led the charge in the plan, according to the outlet. There are mixed feelings regarding informants, as some say they help stop domestic terrorists, but have in the past falsified evidence, committed murder, and entrapped innocent people, BuzzFeed News noted. The group allegedly plotted to kidnap the governor because they were unhappy with the COVID restrictions she put in place in the state. But the plot thickens. One of the FBI agents involved with the case has now been accused of attacking his wife, and I believe has even been arrested. This is from the New York Post and complicates things a little bit. An FBI agent who worked the controversial investigation into the alleged plot to this says to kill Michigan's governor. It was not a plot to kill her. It was a plot to kidnap her. So that is an error on their part. But the FBI agent that was involved in the investigation was arrested earlier this week for assaulting his wife after the two went to a swingers party, according to a local report. And we actually have that local report right here. Oh, look at that beefcake. G-Man Richard Trask of Kalamazoo repeatedly slammed his wife's head into a nightstand and choked her with both hands before she stopped the attack by grabbing his crotch on Sunday, according to the Detroit News and a court affidavit. His wife's chest, clothes, and hand were covered in blood, and she had severe bruises on and around her neck, according to the affidavit. The two had come home after attending an Oshtempo Township hotel event the publication called a swingers party. After some drinks, they argued on the way home about how Trask's wife didn't enjoy the party, the news said. So she didn't have fun at the swingers party, and so he nearly beat her to death and choked her out. That is obviously an appropriate response. Once home, he allegedly got on top of her in bed and smashed her head into the nightstand several times before she tried to grab his beard to get free. That's when he allegedly choked her, the news reported. So he was arrested on Monday and has been released on bond. In accordance with FBI policy, the incident is subject to internal review, and I cannot comment further on this time. FBI spokeswoman Mara Schneider told lawandcrime.com he is facing up to 10 years in prison on a charge of assault with intent to do great bodily harm, according to the news. So that does complicate things a little bit. His affidavit was used in charges against the people accused of plotting to kidnap and kill Governor Gretchen Whitmer, she is a witch, in retaliation of her COVID shutdown orders, and he even testified in the case. So it's going to be interesting to see if they're even going to use his testimony at this point and how that goes. So here is the original article from the Detroit News. We'll see if there's any other details. Complicates one of the most closely watched cases of violent extremism that is becoming increasingly focused on allegations of wrongdoing by investigators. He was released on $10,000 personal recognizance bond following an arraignment in 8th District Court in Kalamazoo. Let's see. So the charge is less than murder following a domestic incident with his wife. Arrest comes at a critical juncture in the criminal case against 5 men charged in federal court with plotting to kidnap Whitmer. Defense lawyers last week leveled a broad attack on the foundation of the high-profile case and suggested a second FBI agent was trying to sabotage defense teams. Oh, that's interesting. Trask himself has worked for the FBI since 2011 and served as the FBI's public face in the Whitmer case. Ooh, that's even juicier. Testifying in federal court about the investigation. He has worked on cases involving espionage, terrorism, and domestic extremism investigations. It's the last thing you want for a major case like this, said Andrew Arena, former special agent in charge of the FBI's Detroit office. Anytime you give the defense any ammunition, it's not good. Details about the incident were not available at the time, and Trask did not respond to a message seeking comment Monday, and there was no defense lawyer listed in court records at the time. The incident is subject to internal review by the Internal Affairs of the FBI, and depending on the severity, it could be a suspension until things are ironed out one way or another. He also apparently does CrossFit. And he has an active Instagram account with pictures of him flexing and posing shirtless. As part of his bond conditions, he is prohibited from possessing a firearm. Now, that's going to be interesting if he is convicted on any of these charges. And my God, if this woman was bloody and almost choked to death, I would think that he would be convicted. Well, that would technically make him, I'm not sure about in Michigan, but in most states, that then makes him a prohibited person, right? From possessing a firearm. So then what happens to his cushy FBI job? That is a really good question. If you can't carry a weapon, then you're not going to work as a street agent. He's going to be suspended or put on restricted duty. And then what does that do to the actual Michigan case? Excellent questions, and it will be fun to see how this all plays out. All right, so it is 8:30. I'm going to jump into the super chats here. Omega says I called her wretched witchmer or W bitchmer. It was a total Freudian slip on my part, but hey, it fit. Bruce says World Economic Forum did say you will own nothing and be happy. Agenda coming true with businesses and homeowners with Blackstone Group. That is true. I haven't looked too much into the Blackstone stuff. But I mean, the stuff out of the World Economic Forum is just downright creepy. Steve Pat says they have to create problems to fix them, pretend to be needed and relevant, and give reasons to have budget increases and not be disbanded. That is true. I don't think the FBI is ever going to be disbanded. I mean, there were 2 presidents. Well, I suppose we'll say 2.5. There was only a few presidents that talked about really coming down on the alphabet agencies, disbanding alphabet agencies, or limiting their power. One of them was JFK. We all know what happened to him. Reagan actually tried to look at federal regulations and how some of these things were run, and well, look what happened to him. There was an assassination attempt against him, and then he suddenly did a 180 on like everything. And then Trump. I mean, Trump, the establishment did not like him for many reasons, one of which being, he was very critical of some of the stuff going on in government. He was critical of the FBI. He was critical of the number of regulations. And people said that he was a liar, but when it came to things about war in the Middle East, he flat out was like, oh yeah, well, we're leaving some people over there to guard the oil fields because we need oil. And he was very transparent about some of the stuff going on in foreign policy. Yes, he did do some airstrikes and they were not great, but he was pretty transparent about some of the big important issues. And I think that folks in government did not like that he was revealing some of their secrets that they somehow think that no one else knows. But with that in mind, I don't think that we're ever going to see any of these alphabet agencies get disbanded or have their budgets severely cut. It would be nice, but I don't think it's going to happen. Trashman says, did Freddie Fed have a little roid rage? Maybe. He actually looks like someone I used to know too, which is creepy because that guy is creepy. Ooh, Ricky L. Hendricks bringing up the controversial point here. Says law enforcement is the largest single group of wife beaters. A convicted wife beater is not supposed to be able to possess firearms. Well, I mean, I know that there are some states where it's considered well, it depends on the charge. If the charge is a misdemeanor, then you are not barred from possession. But in states where it's more than a misdemeanor, then you are barred. I would imagine if he's facing that much prison time, then it is more than a misdemeanor. But there's a difference between what he's charged with and what actually sticks. And because he's law enforcement, one of two things could happen. They could thin blue line it and get him the least amount of charges possible, or because he's involved in such a high profile case and there's going to be a lot of attention on it, then they actually say, no, sorry, man, you've got the full charges, you're going to jail. Of course, if he went to jail, he would go to some cushy jail or be in PC, because you're not going to put an FBI agent in with General Pop. That would not go well for him at all. So I am definitely going to be following that case, and if there are any updates on it, I will give them to you guys as they come. Yeah, Bullets for Teeth says domestic violence conviction, kiss your Second Amendment goodbye. Yep. Q says our local super cop strangled to death his... Oh, God. He strangled his 8-month pregnant wife to death that he cheated on with and then tried to make it look like a suicide. Oh, that is awful. Oh, that is awful. And then people reminding me that I did not hydrate this whole thing, this whole time. Anyways, it is 8:35. I am starving, even though I also had a snack before I came on, like I said. So, and I missed one from Q. If he goes to jail, he will be randomly killed by another prisoner or kill himself. Yep. Yeah. I mean, that's basically what I just said. Absolutely. Werewolf says he would be a check-in protective custody unit. Absolutely. Madcap Magician says not a damn thing will happen to this scumbag. Jesse says if it's a violent domestic abuse conviction, 2A rights are gone. Well, yup. So, I mean, I don't ever think that people should lose their rights, but because he's a scumbag Fed boy that hatched this whole plot that then made all the boogs look worse than the media was already making them look, and like really kicked off this whole domestic terrorism extremism thing. I hope that it happens. I hope that he gets convicted. I mean, it sounds like he deserves to be convicted just based on that alone. But yeah, I hope they throw the book at him, and I hope that he experiences everything that he's been fighting for everyday Americans to experience. Just saying. And with that, I am going to go eat my dinner and go play some Dungeons and Dragons. So thank you, everyone. Oh, now I have the hiccups. One last super chat from Steve Pat says he sounds like a good runner-up for ATF by leftist standards, right? I don't know what the status is of the David Chipman situation at the moment, but maybe they'll nominate this guy next. But thank you, everyone who tuned in. We had a really good amount of people here at one point. I mean, we always have a pretty good amount of people, but it was a little higher than usual at one point. So thank you, everyone who came and hung out. Thank you for all the likes. Any new subscribers, there might be a couple in there. Everyone who sent in the super chats, thank you to the mods, all the folks over at Patreon and Subscribestar, and tune in. There will be a new video up tomorrow. I finished it earlier tonight, but I didn't want to cut it too close to the live stream, so it will be going up tomorrow, and it will be all about this new drama with Black Rifle Coffee Company. It's pretty interesting. It's not a good look for them. I'm going to tell you that much. So stick around for that. And I will see all of you guys tomorrow. Jameson Wilfon gets the last one in and says a little something for your snack. Well, thank you. Dinner is pad thai, leftover pad thai that I made. Yes, I made it myself. Homemade pad thai. All right. Good night, everyone. Have a good weekend, and I will see you on the next stream. Bye.